inside the Canadian wilderness, Roch Theriault, a charismatic religious figure, was building a community. Under the guise of self-help and spiritual cleansing, he created a community that trusted him. So when he started prophesying the end of times, they believed him, and they were willing to do anything to secure their place in heaven alongside their leader. Our story begins with the Ant Hills Kids leader, Roch Theriault. Born May 16th, 1947, in Quebec, Canada, Roch's early life was a bit tragic. His mother had given birth to Roch as the result of incestuous sexual assault. The men in his early life, whom he believed might be his father, were in fact just his mother's boyfriends. Roch learned early on that his biological father was actually his grandfather, a shocking revelation that rocked the young boy. The rest of the family shunned Roch due to his lineage, further isolating him. Roch's mother was a strict Catholic and made sure to raise Roch to respect the church and all of its teachings. As a result, his mother and grandfather were exceedingly strict with him, leading him to turn his back on religion later in life. Those who knew Roch as a child said he was very intelligent, but this did not always translate into his grades. Little did his teachers know, Roch was being abused at the hands of his stepfather and mother. He would later testify that he had been physically abused by almost every adult in his life, creating a bitter and angry young man. Despite the abuse, Roch's mother still wanted to forge a good path for him. Her plan was for Roch to become a Catholic priest, a role that would bring honor back to the family, no doubt. But Roch wanted more from life. As a teenager, he decided to drop out of school and try to take on life alone. It is also around this time that Roch began drinking as a means to cope. His behavior had begun to devolve, and he was known for violent outbursts. Life for Roch went off rails for a few years, living between different homeless shelters and performing odd jobs just to keep afloat. Roch's life changed in 1972 following a chance encounter. When Roch met a Seventh-day Adventist priest, he realized that it wasn't religion that he hated, just Catholicism. Seventh-day Adventists are Protestants who believe in biblical prophecies, such as the second coming of Christ. Following this meeting, Roch drove back into the Bible, this time focusing on the Old Testament. Roch began to believe that the end of times were coming, and he was the only one with the answers. During his stay at various homeless shelters, Roch had begun to grow a small but devoted following. They hung on his every word and waited to hear when Christ would be coming again. Roch spent the rest of the 1970s spreading the word and collecting more followers until his time would finally come. In 1977, Roch had built up a big enough following to create his own quote-unquote commune, better known as a cult, in Ste. Marie, Quebec. He called this group the Ant Hill Kids, and he told his followers that the end of the world would come in 1979. He specifically believed that there would be a battle between good and evil, which would bring about an apocalypse. At first, life in the commune was good. They followed a strict vegetarian diet and retreated to motivational speeches from Roch. Every day, Roch would make his followers build their new commune in the Gaspé Peninsula. He told them that their hard work would pay off when the world ended, but he himself contributed little to the commune. 1979 came and went, and when the world didn't end, as Roch had said, his followers began to doubt him. In order to curb their doubts, he assured them that his timing and God's divine timing clearly operated on a different calendar, and that the end was indeed near. His control over his followers grew, as did his paranoia. He began calling himself Moses, and told his followers he was an emissary of God, with godlike healing powers. Those within the cult were forbidden from speaking to outsiders. As Roch said, it violated the church's core tenets and values. He also told women in the commune that they had to marry and procreate with him in order to make more followers. Whether these relationships were consensual or not, by the 1980s, Roch had impregnated 9 women, producing 22 children. When followers fell out of line, harsh punishment soon followed. Roch insisted that he had to beat his followers to rid them of their sins, but as the years went by, these beatings devolved into unspeakable acts. On one occasion, Roch asked his followers to break their own legs with a sledgehammer to prove their loyalty. If the followers refused, their legs would be broken for them. They were forbidden from seeking outside medical assistance, instead being told to pray that their legs healed properly. It wasn't just the adults who were physically abused by Roch, though. If children failed to recite Bible passages or misbehaved, they would be stripped of their clothing and made to sit outside in the harsh Canadian winter. In 1981, Roch Theriault's abuse would take a sickening turn. By this point, he was drinking heavily and truly believed himself to be a prophet of God. Samuel Gilguri, one of Roch's sons, was brutally tormented by his hand when he had a difficulty using the bathroom. Roch's response was to mutilate his genitals, slicing them open. This incredibly painful and crude surgery left Samuel screaming, which angered Roch. He ordered one of his followers to beat Samuel until his last breath. This follower then placed Samuel's body on a fire in a bid to destroy the evidence. But this follower didn't win Roch's adulation. Instead, Roch castrated his follower and told him to play it off if anyone asked. All of this violence was beginning to raise suspicions within the tiny Quebec town, and Roch decided that his cult needed a new home. In 1984, the Anthill Kids moved to Burnt River, Ontario. Here, they believed they were safe, unnoticed by the world, but they were anything but. Things would slowly begin to unravel, but not without a whole lot of violence first. Anyone was susceptible to Roch's horrific physical and sexual abuse, no matter how small the indiscretion. His beliefs only grew further and further, and soon, beating someone's sin out of them wasn't enough. He told followers that the only way to purify them for the end of times was to let him perform surgery on them. Unable to leave, his followers could do little else but submit. If anyone did try and leave, they were immediately rounded up by other members and brought back to Roch. According to reports, he strung up deserters to the ceiling and plucked out their hairs one by one. Those who survived Roch Theriault's death cult also testified that they were defecated on, whipped, and forced to sit naked over hot fires to prove their loyalty. By 1987, Roch had fallen deep down the Adventist hole. He was convinced that the end of days was soon, and that only he was pure enough to see the kingdom of heaven. In late 1987, the Anthill Kids found themselves the subject of a social services investigation. According to reports, that winter, Gabriella Lavelli, one of Roch's wives, had placed her newborn baby outside during a blizzard. She would later state that Roch had not directed her to do so. In fact, she had done it so that the baby would never have to experience abuse at the hands of Roch. She saw it as an act of mercy, but Roch did not feel the same way. Following the death of Lavelli's infant, social services got involved. They opened an investigation and visited the cult's new Ontario home. The workers were horrified by the conditions. People were sleeping in small shacks, keeping warm with whatever they could scavenge or afford to buy. The children were in terrible condition, and there was no formal education on site, and the pattern of abuse was clear. There are conflicting reports. However, it is believed that anywhere between 14 and 17 children were removed from the cult's custody. Bizarrely, no charges were pressed against Roch or his followers at this time. Social services were more focused on getting the children out and into the foster care system that ensured justice was served. It has been cited that the Anthill Kids were legally registered as a church, thus not allowing authorities the right to investigate the adults. Nonetheless, their decision to allow the cult to continue drew much criticism in the later years. Only the adults were left behind, leaving 2 men and 8 women. Once the children had been removed, Roch's violence stepped up a notch, if that's even possible. In September 1988, Roch performed his most despicable surgery to date. That September, Solange Beaulieu was forced onto the kitchen table, where Roch sat patiently at her side. Solange had been saying that her stomach was hurting, and Dr. Theriault, was happy to help. Once she was stripped of her clothing, Roch got to work, forcing a plastic tube up her rectum. He filled the tube with olive oil and molasses, believing this enema would sort her out. But he wasn't finished yet. He also made an incision on the side of her abdomen and grabbed part of her intestines. He ripped out a small part before shoving the rest back into her stomach. She was crudely stitched up and told that she had been cured. In reality, Zolan was in agony, but dared not to scream out in front of Roch. She snuck off to her bed, where she'd pass away the next morning. As if Roch hadn't already inflicted enough mental damage to his followers, he proclaimed over Zolan's body that he could resurrect her. What he did to Zolan's body is unspeakable, but what I will say is that it didn't work. Once this failed, his remaining followers were ordered to bury her body. The outside world was beginning to grow privy of the Anthill kids. Their children had been taken away from them years earlier, and those in Burnt River recognized them from their roadside shops. Friends and families of the followers began demanding that police do something. They had been unable to contact their loved ones for years, and it was clear that they were being held against their will. "1989 would mark the beginning of the end for the Anthill kids. The Canadian police were under growing pressure to rescue their followers and see that Roch Theriault was brought to justice. On August 16, 1989, Gabrielle Lavelli finally managed to escape the cult. She walked to a nearby hospital where she recounted her abuse in chilling detail. According to Gabrielle, Roch had been the mastermind behind all of the abuse, including the abuse leveled towards children. His drinking had become out of control, and there was not a moment when he was sober. When under the influence, Roch had become convinced that he was a doctor who needed to operate on his followers. His end-time prophecies had become more bizarre than before, with the date of the end of times changing constantly. The only way he was able to retain those 10 followers was through a campaign of fear and violence. They had not had contact with the outside world for over a decade, and had fallen heavily under his spell. Lavelli told doctors that in July 1989, just a month before her escape, Roch decided to amputate her arm. She had complained of general pain and stiffness, and to him, this was his green light. According to her, Roch had first impaled her hand on the kitchen table with a knife, before grabbing a cleaver and cutting her arm straight off. She also told doctors that Roch had cut off part of her breast, cut a tendon in her hand, and forcibly removed 8 of her teeth. Lavelli would later testify that Roch had also broken off needles in her back and had mutilated her genitals with a blowtorch. She had suffered greatly at his hands and was still forced to carry his children. Lavelli's escape broke the levee, and the police were finally forced to zero in on the cult. Despite the mass violence and abuse that took place at his commune, Roch Theriault was only charged in 2 cases. The first being Gabrielle Lavelli and Zolan Pollard. For the abuse against Lavelli, Roch was given just 12 years. Lavelli's testimony and cooperation with authorities allowed them to gather enough evidence to charge and convict Roch for the death of Zolan Pollard, giving him a life sentence. Despite being locked up, Roch's followers remained devoted, and he went on to father at least 4 more children while behind bars. The media had a field day with the Anthill kids, dubbing them the most violent cult ever. Roch Theriault enjoyed the media circus. It was the attention he had been craving his entire life. He remained steadfast in his doomsday beliefs and continued to prepare his followers for when Christ rises again. Unsurprisingly, Roch was not a very popular man in prison. The details of his crimes against children were now very much public, and he had a target on his back. On February 26, 2011, the life of Roch Theriault would end with a pathetic whimper. That morning, guards found him deceased in his cell due to multiple stab wounds. As per the Montreal Gazette, guards believed that he and another inmate, Matthew McDonald, had gotten into a fight, which devolved when McDonald stabbed Theriault. After stabbing him, McDonald walked up to the guards, shiv in hand, and said, "That piece of shit is down on the range. Here's the knife. I've sliced him up." McDonald, who was already serving a life sentence, was given another life sentence for this attack. The Anthill kids are now inactive with their leader gone. Other followers have tried to keep it going, but without Roch, they felt lost. What became of the surviving followers is unknown. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has made several statements following the unraveling of the cult, maintaining that what Roch Theriault did was in no way connected to their belief system. One of Canada's most dangerous cult leaders was taken out in a violent prison scuffle, a rather fitting end to a man who caused untold damage to his followers and countless children. Wherever those children are now, I hope they had been able to heal from the untold evil of one of Canada's most dangerous men.